Our next speaker is Dr. Laura Sicola. She is a leadership, communication, and influence expert, a speaker, and author of Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice. She is the founder of Vocal Impact Productions and is known for her coaching and live on-camera trainings that turn executives into confident, inspiring leaders in order to get the results they want and make a positive, lasting impact. Her mission is to help people confidently master the 3 C's of vocal executive presence: command the room, connect with the audience, and close the deal. And speaking of connecting with the audience, she would like to have the Q&A happen organically throughout her presentation. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and she'll call on you during the presentation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Laura Sicola.
Can we go to, great, thank you. All right, thank you everyone for having me here today. Sheriff, for the invitation. It is truly an honor to be able to serve you in exchange for all that you do for all of us, because I am 100% clear on one thing, and it is that I get to do what I do every day because you are all out there doing what you do every day. So for that, thank you. I'm an original Jersey girl. And in 1996, I took my Jersey girl self across the country to become a public school teacher in South Central Los Angeles. And apparently, I get more sound effects than visual effects. No, there we go. All right, wrong one. All right, thank you. This is my first class. That's me and my Jersey girl hair over there. So one day it's 3:30 in the afternoon, kids are all gone. I get in my car and I start heading down south because at 4 o'clock, I've got my own class to take. Cal State University, I'm getting my bilingual certification in Spanish and English. And my brain's going in 12 directions at once, as it has a way of doing. And I realized at one point I missed my turnoff. Now, I have a choice to make because class starts at 4, and I have one of those lovely professors who believes that if you are a minute late, you might as well not be there at all, so she'd make you not be there at all and lock the door at 4. So I weighed my options, decided to take a calculated risk, made an illegal U-turn, hoping to get there on time in that tight window. Well, surprise, surprise. 30 seconds later, guess what's in my rearview mirror? Woo, awesome. So I pull over, pull out my license and registration, and wait as the officer, oh so slowly, gets on his hat, gets his stuff, moseys his way on over to the car. He comes over, looks in the window, roll my window down. Know why I pulled you over? Yes, sir. Illegal U-turn. Mm-hmm. Where are you going? Compton? He looked at me. I'm guessing he thought this face looked like it should be trying to head straight out of Compton, not voluntarily going into it. Compton? Why are you going to Compton? So I explained. I said, I'm a teacher. I teach 3rd grade at Ascot Avenue Elementary School up on Vernon. I got to go to Cal State Dominguez Hills tonight for a class getting my bilingual certification. If I'm late, the professor's going to lock me out. All right, look, I'm gonna let you off this time, but you gotta promise me you're just not gonna do it again, all right? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Won't happen again, I promise. He walks away, and I managed to get to class at about 3:59. Now, I was not only grateful that day to A, make it to class on time, and B, avoid a ticket, but I also got clear on one really important thing, and that's that law enforcement officers and teachers share a bond. We all do what we do because we want to make the world a better place. We want to help those who need it most. We go into difficult neighborhoods, we work long hours, typically under-resourced, frequently underappreciated. We deal with people who are struggling with homelessness, hunger, addictions, poverty, crime. And of course, in the middle of it all, we're also supposed to not only do our regular job duties, but we are supposed to be nurses, counselors, therapists, community liaisons, referees, and occasionally surrogate parents. A friend of mine who is a cop out in LA used to say, Laura, the only difference between you and me and our jobs is that I carry a gun. But what we share is the understanding that what we are all truly called to is leadership. We're called to lead. We're called to lead people in our words, in our actions, in their thoughts, in their hearts, in their choices, and in their actions as well. But what is leadership? Short and sweet, leadership's an image. The way that you communicate with someone, the way that you connect with them, will either establish that image in their view or it won't. Because you can be the CEO, the president of a huge organization and not be viewed as a leader, or you can be an intern, you can be a rookie and be viewed as someone who really inherently is. At the core, the goal is really, as he mentioned, being able to master the 3 C's. Number 1, being able to command the room, not demand. You have to command that respect with your presence. What is it that makes people sit up and take notice and pay attention when you talk? To be able to connect with the audience, to somehow establish that mutual understanding that you understand me and I understand you. And number 3, to close the deal. And closing the deal is not about sales. It's about getting to yes, coming to that mutual understanding and agreement, moving the needle forward, sometimes only this much, but agreeing on the direction that needle is going to move. So let me ask you a question. When you think about some of the different audiences that you engage, and I use the word audience very broadly, not just in a formal situation like this, but some of the various stakeholder groups who you want to influence, where you want to have greater impact. Who are they? Think to yourself. Is it neighbors, bosses, direct reports, partners, significant others, kids, teenagers? Good luck with that one. Pick one of those. Let's do a little exercise for a second. I ask you to think, all right, whichever one you're focusing on, pick that face, and ask yourself, what are 3 personal qualities that you want them to see in you? Do you want them to see you as confident, approachable, trustworthy, compassionate, empathetic, determined, easygoing? It may differ from minute to minute, from scenario to scenario, from person to person. But you have to ask yourself, what do those qualities look and sound like? You can't just go up to somebody and say, hi, I'm Laura, I'm trustworthy. What's your immediate response when someone claims to be any of those things? I'll be the judge of that, right? And that's because all of those qualities, whatever they are that you happen to have listed, those are all subjective interpretations of objective behaviors. I'll say it again, all of those qualities, whatever they are that you listed, they are subjective interpretations. Like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, so is confidence, so is authority, so is approachability, so is trustworthiness. They are in the eye of the beholder. So you have to ask yourself, what are the objective speech behaviors? What are you actually doing and saying, looking like, sounding like to that person, and how are they interpreting it? Because you ever have one of those moments where you hear yourself say something and immediately think, that sounded better in my head? Or you're having a conversation with somebody and they react a certain way and you go, how did you get that from what I said? It's all about that interpretation. And when we think about, well, how do you connect with people who are different from you, from us, from me, but still be myself? We pigeonhole ourselves sometimes and we hold ourselves back from true success and influence when we mistakenly think about the choice between adapting or being authentic. Authenticity is not a binary choice. You are being authentic or not being authentic. We have a whole range of styles, of abilities to connect with people. Similarly, nobody's here in their official uniforms today. Well, I guess a few representatives are, but we're in business attire today. Sometimes you've got your dress downs, you are in sloppy sweats, sometimes in black tie formals. That's all part of our wardrobe that we choose to dress based on the context. Well, similarly, we need to dress our messages with our words and our delivery in a way that's also going to connect with the audience. I like to use the analogy of your prismatic voice. You've all, I'm sure, seen those little crystals that people hang from the kitchen window or the rearview mirror, and when the sun hits it, you see that little rainbow on the chair or the wall or the floor someplace. Well, similarly, you are that white light. And inside of you are all those colors of the spectrum. The question is simply, which color should shine brightest in a particular moment to allow the other person to see and hear what they need to see and hear in a way that they can hear what you need them to hear while still being yourself. So just by example, I'm here giving a conference talk on leadership, law enforcement. We'll call this my coaching voice, my keynote voice, my trainer voice. We'll call that my blue. I also have a 6-year-old at home. Surprise, surprise, I don't talk to him like this. He'd stop playing with me. That would kind of defeat the purpose. So we'll call that my orange. Now, sometimes my mommy voice is that fun mommy voice, and sometimes it's a little more hardcore, depending on exactly what the behavior has been for the moment and what I'm reacting to and what I need him to start or stop doing. But it's not to say that my blue speaker voice is my real voice, my authentic voice, and my orange voice, my mommy voice, is fake, or vice versa. They're both 100% authentically me. I just know that if I came here to give this talk in my orange, might not quite click with the audience. You need to hear more of my blue, and that's okay. I have that flexibility, I have that expanse. And recognizing that we are not just, well, this is the way I am. That's me. That's not me. We have that range that allows us to play and to figure out how to connect through. I mean, how many people have had a conversation? How many of you have kids? You up there have kids? You ever have a conversation, regardless of what your ethnic background, cultural background, how many of you had a conversation with your kids that sounded something like this? I want you to listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once. Are you paying attention? Guessing by the chuckles that I'm not the only one who's had that conversation. So that super articulate, I am going to enunciate every word, that's in there. That's part of your repertoire. You just need to know when to pull it out, when to put it away. And there's times to be softer, times to be easier. It's all part of your prismatic voice. Learning to play your full spectrum. That's where your power is. So let's do a little myth busting real quick. I'm going to ask you to go out on a crazy limb with me and just vote myth or fact on a couple of commonly heard expressions. So for example, it's not what you say, it's how you say it that matters. How many feel like that's a fact? I promise I'm not going to test anybody later on. Myth? How many say it's a myth? All right. How about this one? Did you know that 93% of all communication is nonverbal? Read that one too? Anybody? Fact? Myth? Okay. How about this one? Did you know that 55% of all communication is nonverbal? We'll let some of y'all off the hook. How many say 55? True? False? Okay. How about this one? Did you know that words make up only 7% of communication? If you're doing the math, yes, that's the other version of the second one there. I'm going to say it's myth or fact. Okay, myth. All right. They're all myths. They're all myths. These numbers are actually taken from what is probably the most misquoted and mythologized study in communications research in history. I'm going to debunk this and explain where these come from and what actually the far more empowering truth is in just a moment. But it's really important to realize that it's not about an actual percentage of where meaning comes from. At the core of the leadership image is credibility. Do people buy into you as the messenger of the message? Do they believe that you actually believe what you're saying, that you live it, So when you talk, you have a core message that you're trying to convey to your audience. And that message is going to be communicated through 3 channels all at the same time. The first channel is the verbal channel. This is the text that you say. If you were to record yourself and transcribe it and just look at the words on the page, that is your verbal channel. The exact words that come out of your mouth, regardless of what they sound like. Second is the vocal channel. The vocal channel is the sound of those words and the meaning or the interpretation and how it changes for whatever those words are. I mean, what's the difference between nice haircut and nice haircut? The text is identical. Right? The verbal is exactly the same, 2 words, nice haircut. But suddenly the meaning shifts significantly. One makes you want to say thank you very much, and the other may want to make you say something else very much. So the sound of the words also matters. And the third channel is the visual channel. This is your physical communication. Some people will refer to it as nonverbal, but it's everything from the way that you're groomed or dressed to your facial expressions, your body language, your gestures. And what's most important is that all 3 of these channels are in alignment with each other. And this is where we get ourselves in trouble, because when you are out of alignment, then we are sending the listener 3 different mixed signals. Listener doesn't know what to pay attention to. So for example, if I were to introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Lars Sicola, and my company is Vocal Impact Productions, and I do executive coaching for Fortune 500 companies and some government agencies. My TED Talk has almost 7 million views. Technically, the verbal is 100% true. It's all fact. But there's something in you going, I don't know why she'd lie, but something's wrong. Something's off. I don't know why, but I'm just going to reserve judgment and suspend disbelief or belief for the moment. Why? Because what I said and how I looked, how I sounded while I was saying it sent mixed messages. So where are you out of alignment without realizing it when trying to connect and convey information, influence other people in their actions, in their choices, in their beliefs? What research has found, and where we'll do the myth busting now, is that when there are mixed messages, when you're out of alignment, the audience's attention is disproportionately distracted by the visual. When you're out of alignment, you immediately go to that seeing is believing mindset. And you sort of watch my body language, or The second strongest distractor from the core message when you're out of alignment is the vocal, especially tonality. Tonality is the melody of the speech, the highs and the lows in your inflection. That's the second most distracting factor. And that's where we're left with a whopping 7% of the brain that's generally able to just filter out the how you say it and focus on just what was said. This is not that communication is supposed to be 55, 38, 7. If you hit that point, it means you screwed up. That's evidence of unsuccessful communication. So the goal is really to be 100% in alignment, because when your words, your voice, and your body language are all communicating the same one singular three-dimensional message, that's all the audience has to pay attention to. There's far less to misunderstand at that point. That is the goal, because when you can do that, that's the evidence of good communication, and that is at the essence of credibility, that impression, that gut-level instinct that says, I believe him, I believe in her. So with that, how do we break this down? I'm going to take some time to break down these three different levels in a minute, but it all starts with getting clear on what you want your end result to be in this interaction. How do you want people to leave feeling, thinking, doing? And one of the greatest philosophers of our time, and by that, of course, I'm referring to Yogi Berra, was known for having said things like, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. Well, that's actually very true in communication. If you don't think in advance, like putting into a GPS, what address do you want? Where are you trying to take me? Well, how am I supposed to get you there? So we need to decide in the end what effect I want to have on my audience before we start breaking down that message. And there are 3 levels of impact that we need to consider quite explicitly, strategically. Number 1, the cognitive impact. What do you want them to know, to understand, to think when you're done connecting with them? Number 2, the emotional impact. How do you want people to feel? How do you want people to feel? And finally, the behavioral. What do you want them to do? How do you want to change their actions? Make them take it, for starters, or not. The worst impact that you can have on someone after speaking to them is none. Is none. And when there is that mixed message, that's often the impact we have, and we wonder why people don't get our passion. They don't get why what we're saying is the best course of action, why we're trying to help them, and they're still not listening, they're not getting it, because we're not giving it. Clearly, we don't have that end in mind to be able to figure out how to get them there through our words, voice, and body language, what we say, and how we say it. So let's break down these 3 channels to get a little bit more clarity on what some of the specific factors are that make up each one of them. Before I do, any questions so far on the structure? Again, I do really welcome any comments or questions ahead of time, or organically as we go instead of waiting till the end. So feel free, if you're a blurter, hey, I'm a Jersey Italian, like I said, it's hard to offend me, so feel free to just blurt. If after 12 years of Catholic school, you're sort of now a genetic hand raiser, can't not raise your hands, that's fine too, whatever works for you. Okay, so verbal. Verbal is the what you say. So for example, when you talk, do you use fillers? What's your favorite? Anybody see one up there that goes, oh yeah, that one's me? You start every sentence with so. Or maybe you like to mix and match, a whole cocktail. I had a client who used to blend them all together, and his favorite single filler was, Laura, I mean like. And he'd say that over all the time. Well, Laura, I mean like. Well, Laura, I mean like. Well, Laura, I mean like. That was impressive. Or maybe you are someone who, we're all highly educated, professional, experts in our field, so maybe you like the educated fillers. Those are the polysyllabic words that are equally useless. Words like actually, probably, basically. Where is it breaking up the message that you are truly trying to convey? Organization. Everybody likes you to take them on an interesting journey when you're talking, but there's interesting and then there's just downright confusing. Nobody wants to get lost trying to follow your trail as you're talking. How well do you translate? How well do you translate your content for those different stakeholder groups that you had in your head before? Different groups like, are you managing up, managing down, managing sideways? In other words, are you talking to more senior leadership, senior executives, senior roles, or to people who are your direct reports, to your peers, or external groups? They need to hear different messages. Maybe you're talking to crime victims, gang members, government officials, internal or external community partners, even neighborhood residents. You can't say exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, even when you're talking about the same topic, to each of those groups. So, for example, in thinking about managing up versus down, how strategic are you being versus tactical? I had a client in a Fortune 100 company who was passed over more than once for an executive role. She couldn't understand why, because she was well-liked, she was really good at her job, everybody knew she was technically qualified for it. And so we started working together, and what we realized was that she, in many ways, was presenting to the senior leadership, the executive team, in the same way that she was presenting to her own crew. It was too detailed, too specific, and it's a very common phenomenon in managing up, so to speak, to get a little lost in the weeds, in part because we want those leaders to understand how hard we worked, how much effort we put into it, how much research we've done. We want to try to teach by fire hose method, turn on fire hose and drown the person in information, hoping that they will have answered any possible question they could have in advance, and then they can't ask a question later on because questions are scary. So let's just put that out of their world of possibility. Too much detail. She wasn't giving them the big business picture. She wasn't showing them how what she was presenting impacted all the other areas that they had to consider, how it integrated. So when she was not showing them that she could think and talk like them, she wasn't showing them that she belonged in a seat at the table with them. She had to learn to speak their language, go from less tactical to more strategic. They would believe that she had done all that research if she made the compelling business case for it. They want the big picture, 30,000-foot view on everything, not getting lost in the weeds. She had to be able ultimately to just make her point. If you have an hour to talk, that's great, but then get that core message down to what I like to call tweetable and repeatable sound bites, because they're not going to remember your whole hour to take with them. They're going to distill it down to a couple of sentences at best. Well, here's the beauty of it. Either you give them the sentence or two to take with them and pass up the line, or they're going to make up their own. And good luck with that, reflecting exactly what you wanted it to be. Einstein had a great quote. He said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." Mark Twain had a similar one that said, "I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead." It's hard to get that message down to that perfect little piece. Diplomacy, tact. Boy, that's loaded, isn't it? Here's a couple of different definitions that you might agree with. Diplomacy is the art of making a point without making an enemy. How do you get people to hear something they may not want to hear without shooting the messenger in the process, even if it is your message? Or perhaps diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your way. When I got married, my brother-in-law gave the best man's toast, and my husband's brother, and he said to me, "Laura, I'm telling you right now, you can get Larry to do anything you want as long as you let him think it's his idea." So now one of our running jokes at home has been, "You know what, honey? I have a great idea for you to suggest to me later." Or maybe the tact is the ability to go to hell in such a way that they look forward to the trip, if you're more of a Winston Churchill fan. But another way to look at it is that tact and diplomacy is finding that balance between those who feel like they need to be nicey-nicey and those who are just the human sledgehammer of messaging. And what that is really looking to do is finding the balance between respecting the integrity of the relationship, being sensitive to the person and not wanting to really smash their ego, not hurt their feelings, not embarrass them in public, etc., but at the same time, respecting the integrity of the message, being clear. Can you be clear and nice at the same time? And the answer is yes, not nicey-nicey, but respectful to the person. You can give critique of the action, of the steps, without critiquing the human involved and without watering it down. Let's go. There we go. All right, let's slide into the vocal range. Vocal is all about how you say it. This is the sound of the words as they come out. So, number one, let's talk about speed, pauses, nerves. Often when people are in a more formal speaking situation like this, whether it's 10 people or 100 people, what happens? The adrenaline kicks in. And when the adrenaline starts going, what happens to the rest of your body? Everything starts moving faster. The palms sweat, the knees maybe start shaking a little bit, the mouth goes dry, all that fun stuff. But adrenaline works on speech like gravity works on a car going downhill. Say that again. Adrenaline works on speech like gravity works on a car going downhill. You can be speaking or driving your car at 60 miles an hour, got the accelerator depressed to whatever angle, and you're cruising along, but then if the road starts to dip downward and you leave your foot where it is, what happens to the car? It goes from 60 to 70, 80, 90 miles an hour and faster. Similarly, if you're talking at, let's say, 60 miles an hour, and then the adrenaline kicks in, oh my gosh, You think you're talking at 60 miles an hour, but suddenly it turned into 70, 80, 90 miles an hour and faster. Now, I said I'm a Jersey Italian. I can talk darn fast, and that's when I'm not caffeinated. I very specifically went on decaf this morning because I just know better. I mean, you guys are New Yorkers, so you could probably keep up with me, which is rare for the audiences that I speak to. But nevertheless, I want to make sure that my words are coming out intelligibly, that the pacing reflects my confidence in the content and doesn't sound so fast that it sounds like I'm frantic and nervous and projecting something that otherwise I'm not. It's just over caffeine. So part of the other issue is that when we are speaking naturally, and especially, I'm going to call it driving under the influence of adrenaline, is that we tend to talk in long, run-on sentences, streams of consciousness. How many people have a friend who sends you text messages that are missives that are this long with no punctuation, no spelling, barely grammar, hardly intelligible, and the minute you see that thing pop up, you just go, oh, just, dude, call me, I can't read this. That's how most people talk. Stream of consciousness. Just going one point after another, no breath, no comma, no period. And when we have that run-on sentence, the audience is going, I don't really understand where you're going with this. I can't follow. I'm back on that maze of a journey. So we have to remember that you can trust me, that you can't trust yourself, that when you feel the adrenaline kicking in, you do not have an accurate perception of time. Silences feel interminable. They're not. So we need to actually allow ourselves to pause. Make a statement. If you were going to write it out, put a period at the end of your sentence on text. Equally, put a vocal period on the end of your point. Pause. That's your space bar. Take a breath and make your next point instead of and then, and then, and then, and then, and then. Help them focus. Show that confidence in your content. Vocal fry. Anybody recognize that phrase, vocal fry? Vocal fry is that pattern that a lot of people have where they creak through their words. Sounds kind of gravelly like this. Maybe you start out okay, but then you kind of trail off at the ends of your sentences. Or, I mean, look, maybe you think that the Kardashians, your perfect paragon of leadership, and that's who you want to emulate, in which case, great. But more typically, there are, when you do tend to fry out as you're talking, there's a lot of different reasons why it may happen, but regardless of why it occurs, the fact is it leaves an impression. Typically, if I'm going to talk like this, how do I sound? What assumptions do you make about me? Now, it could be that on the one hand you think, all right, she's tired, she's bored. Well, great, she's bored and she's the speaker. What does that say if you're not even interested in your own content? Could sound like I've been smoking 2 packs a day since I was 8. Could sound like I'm kind of hesitant, like I don't really want to say what I'm going to say because I'm not sure you're going to accept it. For some people, it may sound like, okay, I'm going to start talking, and then as I trail off at the end of my sentence, maybe it's because I am trying to remember what my next point's going to be, but I'm not actually done articulating my current point, so I'm not mentally present for my own statements. But one way or another, it does tend to project indifference or lack of confidence. I may be fully confident, but that's not the impression I'm making, or worst case scenario, you are actually nervous, feeling uncomfortable about something. Do you want to project that vocally? I mean, would you walk into the room and say, hi, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Laura Sicola, and I want you all to know that you intimidate me utterly. No, why would I say that orally? Well, if I don't want to say it out loud verbally, why would I inflect it vocally? Just kind of let the words dribble out of my mouth because I'm supposed to say something, but I'm afraid to assert them in full clarity. Make sure that it's all about breath support. And that's why the run-on sentence that we talked about a moment ago is really your worst enemy, because when you're allowing yourself to just run on in stream of consciousness talk and not have point 1, point 2, point 3, there's no place to inhale. There's no place to refuel the tank. You need that air. It's all about the breath support to allow yourself to project that confidence and authority, whether or not your knees are shaking. Nobody needs to know it, so don't tell them. Okay, intonation. Intonation is a challenge because it's the highs and the lows in the speech. And now there's good and bad. I mean, lack of intonation variation at all is something that's going to, all my Gen Xers out there hopefully will recognize this, the reference, but if you want people to respond to you by saying Bueller, Bueller, anyone, anyone, okay, that's lack of intonation, but nowadays a much more common pattern that we tend to hear is something referred to as upspeak, where it sounds like you're asking a lot of questions even when you're not. Anybody recognize that pattern? And while it does tend to evoke the stereotype of the Valley Girl, going back to my Gen X references here, I have news for you, gentlemen. I'm so sorry to tell you, a Y chromosome is not a vaccine against upspeak. Men do it just as much as women do. Older and younger, more educated and less educated. The difference is confirmation bias. We believe it's a young, female, stereotypical kind of a thing to do. So when we hear women do it, we go, oh yeah, she's one of those. We hear men do it all the time too. We just dismiss it because we think, well, guys don't do that, so that can't be it. It's gotta be something else. Nope, it doesn't. That's exactly what it is. And aside from the fact that it tends to leave the impression of lacking confidence or authority. Why? Because that rising tone imitates a very legitimate structure in English that's referred to as a tag question. A tag question is when you make a statement and then at the end you tack on, right, you know, okay? And if you're going to say that once in a while as a means of engaging the audience and seeking feedback, fine. But if every phrase, one after another, at about the same pace each time implies, all right, you know, is that okay? Know what I mean? Then what that actually ends up doing is sounding like I'm just begging for validation, perpetually. And the worst part about that is that I give away my power when I do that. Because if I'm begging you for perpetual validation, who have I framed as the expert? You. I need you to validate what I'm saying. So you give away your power when you let your voice do this. Now, there's a lot of reasons why it can happen. And there's a lot of effects that it has as well. Aside from the subjective, remember we talked about subjective interpretations of objective behaviors, that it tends to sound not very confident, not very authoritative, because it's more questions than statements, and authority would be able to make statements about their content. But more importantly, on an objective level, upspeak, and it's not just once in a while going up. Upspeak is that perpetual lilting, like you're bobbing on the waves kind of a thing, over and over and over again, out of control. But objectively, when you speak with upspeak, you are not giving the listener's brain an auditory focal point. It literally makes it harder for them to process your message. Because we don't process sound in a linear stream, or we don't process speech in a linear sequence of sounds. We hear chunks of sounds, chunks of words, chunks in a phrase. And our ear naturally gravitates to what is emphasized. So if you think of this as the pitch wave, the highs and the lows in what we say, our ear anchors on to the high points because we recognize that's an emphasis. So your brain goes, oh, okay, that word sounds important, that word sounds important, that word sounds important. But when everything just keeps doing this over and over again, what does your ear get drawn to? Whatever's last in the phrase and ends up on the highest pitch may or may not be what you actively want them to pay attention to. So we're distracting them and making them reprocess what they heard and go, well, if that wasn't important, then actually what was? And again, harder to focus. Seems like you're not clear on what it is that you're trying to convey. One of the reasons that this tends to happen to everybody, regardless of confidence level and regardless of any other demographic checkbox that you want to check off, is that we often go into mental list mode. Going back, remember that run-on sentence piece. That is your worst nightmare, that run-on sentence. Because when you're running through things, it's often like going into a list. Remember how your first grade teacher told you how to read aloud? When you see a comma, your voice goes up. When you see a period, your voice goes down. So Johnny went to the store and bought apples, comma, milk, comma, bread, comma, and bubble gum, period. There's more, there's more, there's more. I guess I'm done. So when we're talking, maybe you're giving an explanation with multiple factors to it. Maybe you're giving instructions with multiple steps. Maybe you're going through an agenda or a list of bullets on a screen someplace. It's list after list. Maybe you have just multiple points that you want to make. In your brain, it's all one answer. And if you're not careful to distinguish where those periods go, then very likely you're going to end up going in mental list mode and just going until you're done. And it's a lot of up, and there's another point, and here's another point, even reading a bio. Where's the period? Do you just wait till the end and go, I guess I ran out of stuff to say? Now I'll make a declarative-ish sounding point. The tone of your voice matters. And by the way, that Bueller reference, when a lot of people, especially guys with really low voices, just tend to drone on and on a little bit. They don't really play with much in their intonation space. The fact is, it's really the same thing as upspeak. It's just with a much lower range. It doesn't go up as high. It's this, just the narrower pitch range. All right, let's see. There we go. All right, sliding into the visual. Continuing on the aspect of the delivery, we talked about the voice. I like the acronym PEGS. Nice, easy, simple mnemonic, little checklist to look for yourself. So P is for posture. And whether you're standing or sitting, as we all tend to do nowadays, in front of our computer screens, posture matters. Aside from the fact that physiologically, when you're slouched over, you're compressing your lungs, so you're not going to be able to get a full tank of air. You're more likely to go into vocal fry at that point because there's not enough air to really allow for good breath support. Posture helps, but it also leaves an impression. I'm up here talking about leadership communication. If this was my posture as I'm talking about leadership, confidence, authority, wouldn't that immediately have you go, wait, what? Before I even open my mouth, the posture matters. And sitting or standing, I can't tell you how many video conferences I've been on where the speaker at a virtual event is kind of slouched over like this in the chair. The screen is here, the head is down here in the corner. I'm like, do you not know how to use it? Just tip it. I mean, take over the screen. Can you imagine sitting in a conference room someplace across the table from somebody and all you see is a head on a table? That would just be weird. I mean, own the space. Tip your camera down. So posture is the P. Second, E is for eyes. Now, of course, we all know the importance of eye contact. I want every single person in this room to feel at some point like I'm talking to them specifically. But it's not just your eyes and where you're looking. Did you know that your eyebrows also communicate an incredible amount? I realized a few years ago that my thinking face was this. My eyebrows come together, kind of knit in the middle. And when I came to that realization, it was during a time when I was teaching graduate classes at the University of Pennsylvania down in Philly. And I had invited a student to come to office hours to get some help with her term paper. I knew she was having a little trouble with it. So again, student I liked, wanted to help. I was offering, was all benevolence. She comes in, hands me her draft, sits down, and I started to read it, and I caught myself. And I said to her, by the way, as I'm reading, if my face does this, don't worry, I'm not angry, I'm just concentrating. And she immediately slumped down in her chair and went, oh, thank God, I was so scared. I thought, wow, scared. I scared my student because I did this. Wow, how much power there is in little things to be misinterpreted. So, and by the way, do you know that even when people can't see you, you can be off camera on the telephone, they can hear where your eyebrows are? If your eyebrows are up or eyebrows are down, it changes the tone of your voice. Remember that old song, the head bone's connected to the neck bone's connected to the shoulder bone, that old piece? Well, all the muscles in your head and your face do the same thing. Depending on what they're doing, they change the sound of your voice. People can hear how you look, the facial expressions that you're making. G is for gestures. So I always tell my clients, look, when you're public speaking or even on Zoom, the fact is you want to win an Oscar for your performance, not look like one. You can move. It's really okay. Now, it's not to say that, well, on the one hand, yes, we don't want to be totally stiff, but we don't want to go to the far extreme either and look like one of these guys outside the car dealerships. That's not better. It's about finding that balance between the two. And it may be little things like, do you have a nervous habit of playing with your ring, picking at your nails, the cuticles, whatever it happens to be? I do pitch coaching for some universities and startup incubators, and I was coaching one of the finalists for a competition over at Temple University, and I said to the young woman who otherwise had a really good pitch, I said, slide number XYZ, that's where you're not confident yet, isn't it? And she kind of nodded in confession. I said, you have a tell. Do you know what it is? She said, no. I said, it's your left thumb. She said, what do you mean? I said, you're holding the clicker. There's a battery compartment in the back. When you get nervous, you slide the cover on the battery compartment back and forth. Click, 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 click. The faster and the more you slide it, the less I know you're confident in what you're saying. Body language. Or maybe you're somebody who's developed T-Rex arms over time, and you've been told when you speak in public you're supposed to use hand gestures, but you're still not really confident. So, like, here we go. That's good, right? Like, who taught the dinosaur to type? Not quite sure, but at least I'm making gestures. If nothing else, even when you're on a screen this big, dislodge the elbows first and foremost. Move from the shoulder. Gestures can be small, they can be meaningful. Ideally, they should reflect the size of the point you're trying to make, the size of the emotion that you're trying to convey, and frankly, the size of the audience and the physical space that you have to fill. Simple rules of thumb. And S is for smile. We tend to forget to do this. Now, it's not to say that we want to have the nervous giggle or nervous laugh, nervous smile, which can certainly tank us just as well, but more often than not, it's the other, where we're trying to encourage people. We're trying to galvanize people for a new initiative. We want people to get excited about something. This is going to add to a positive impact for everybody else. But we're so focused on getting the content right, being nervous, not wanting to get something wrong, not wanting to make a mistake, that we're so serious. If you want people to be happy about something, you should probably look like you're happy about it too. But one way or another, it's all about the facial expression. Where is your facial expression communicating what you feel and what you want people to feel in return? There's these things called mirror neurons in the brain that is part of why when you smile at somebody else, they naturally smile back at you. Whatever face they're making, they tend to make in return. It's all unconscious, but people will feed back to you the energy that you feed to them first. Virtually or in person, one-on-one or one on 1,000, doesn't really matter. But starting with the facial expressions that you impart, they're going to make that snap judgment before you even utter your first word. What message do you pre-convey? Because that creates a filter that they will then use to interpret the rest of what you do actually articulate. All right, so here's good, we have a couple minutes left for questions, but here's my call to action for you. I want you to either, on your phones or wherever you have it, write down 3 takeaways for yourself. Thinking about the audience, pick that, whatever you want, single person, group, stakeholder, on your phones, on paper, whatever you've got. What are 3 takeaways for you today from this? So when you go back and you're talking to your wife, you're talking to your direct report, you're talking to the politician that you're going to speak to later this afternoon, you're talking to someone at that particular correctional facility, you're talking to whoever it is, you need to get through to them. You want them to understand something and to think, feel, and do something specific as a result of your engagement with them. What are 3 things you're going to keep in mind when you go to talk to that person or that group today that you otherwise would not have thought about? Ask you to at least make a mental note, but better yet, if you're really going to cement learning, find a way to jot it down for yourself, digitally or otherwise, to cement that in. So with that, I will invite you, if this has been valuable to you, there's a lot more of it, along with plenty of exercises, so there's never, thank you, Rohan, there's no excuse to not be able to internalize the skills that we're talking about today through the book. And of course, there is a podcast that has had some fabulous guests on it that I would highly recommend everyone listen to if you have a chance. Talking to different leaders each week specifically about the role of communication as an essential leadership skill, because you're only going to make it up the career ladder so far based on your technical expertise. Then it's about how well you make that transition and how well you lead people. And that is all communication. So with that, as Rohan mentioned equally, feel free to follow me on social media, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to continue the discussions with all of you. And I would love some takeaways, whether you wrote them down physically or just made mental notes. What's a takeaway today? And I'm happy to use this time for questions as well. Thank you. Yes, Sheriff.
So many of us sometimes only have that opportunity to have that elevator speech when we know we're going to speak to someone. How would you prepare or condense some of the topics that you may want to convey to the person you're speaking to in that elevator speech moment?
So the question was, when you only have the time frame, the window of enough to get through the elevator speech, so to speak, how do you condense it? So the answer will always begin with "it depends." Any answer about how to get through to any person should always begin with "it depends," because there's no singular way to connect with everybody. So some of the factors that I would want to consider are, A, what's the initiative? Is it a warning that we have to fix a problem, or is it an encouragement we want to gain excitement about something? Are they people who have already drunk the Kool-Aid? Is it people who know you well, people who don't know you at all? In the end, I would say, if nothing else, go back to yogi, start with the end in mind. If you had to begin by saying, if you don't remember anything else I say today, remember this, what would that be? Because that at least helps you get clear on what coordinates you're putting in your GPS. And then you can figure out what to back out and include from there. Sometimes people are going to relate to different factors. I don't always tell the teaching story. As a matter of fact, I have never once shown that picture in a presentation. My 1996 first-year teaching self. I've mentioned teaching, but not like that. But that's my opportunity to connect with you and share part of my history with this audience in a way that a bunch of CFOs wouldn't care about most likely. So you pick and choose based on the audience what they need to know to help them buy into what you're saying. So here's an exercise that you can do. When you say, Sheriff, elevator pitch, how much time are you thinking?
Less than a minute.
Less than a minute. Okay, so here's what you do. You're going to give yourself 3 to 4 rounds. Take your phone, open up your either camera or your voice memo app, and give yourself 5 minutes, max. If you only need 3, that's fine. But talk yourself through whatever it is that you think you want to, whatever your point is. Express it. Hit stop, listen to it, make some notes. Okay, that was effective, that wasn't effective. If I repeated myself 3 times, I totally left this part out. All right, note to self. Now make it 3 minutes. Do it again. Record yourself. Hone that down. Same thing. You listen. What was effective? What wasn't? What can I tighten up? Do it again in 2 minutes. And then do it again for 1. And you'll realize that with each successive stage, as you listen, you'll be extremely clear on what needs to be there and what did not. And where a lot of times it's just the polishing, the tweak, tweak, tweak. Make this phrase 4 words instead of 9. How do you tighten that up? But that's a good exercise that you can use to help you really get to the essence of what that 1-minute elevator pitch would be. That help?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Other questions or comments, takeaways? Yes, sir.
How much do you think that exercise can actually change somebody who's maybe in their middle age and who has been communicating the way they've been communicating, virtually their whole adult lives and even before that? My next question is going to be, is there a curriculum for that? And I see that you've written a book about it, so that seems like it would probably be very, very helpful. But from your experience, can that exercise actually, again, change somebody's ability to communicate, effectively? And if so, how much, realistically?
Realistically, massively. And the single greatest factor in determining that success is motivation. Do you want to learn a new way to communicate or not? I worked with the SVP of finance at a big chemical company, and he knew that he was the heir apparent to the CFO role in a couple of years, knowing when the CFO was going to retire. And the board gave him a gift. They went right up to him and said to his face, "The fact is, when you talk, we don't understand you. So either fix it, or when the spot opens up, we're going to find somebody else." It didn't feel like a gift in the moment, but trust me, that was a gift, because he was super clear on what the problem was and that they were hoping he would fix it. So we started working together, and it was a lot of the things that we discussed here, the run-on sentences to being too tactical, not strategic enough, and too much of this and not enough of that. And he needed to understand, like, there's a lot that's at stake here. Do you want that opportunity or not? That was a big piece. There's also plenty of people that I've worked with where they're frustrated and going back to that prismatic voice and not pigeonholing ourselves into the this is me, that's not me. Really? Because how's the this is me working for you so far? If you're coming to me for help voluntarily, it's because whatever you feel like is you in that finite box that you've created for yourself, you're banging your head against the wall somewhere. You're not getting those cognitive, emotional, and behavioral effects that you're looking for. Do you want to hear yes more often? The world's not going to change. You got to change the way that you speak with them. Part of the challenge is that the learning curve, by definition, is about stepping outside your comfort zone. Whether you're going to learn to play golf, speak a foreign language, or do anything else, the initial part, you're gonna feel messy, sloppy, incompetent, embarrassed, novice, all that great stuff. But people misconflate the construct of comfortable and effective with authentic. Just because you're at the beginning of a new learning curve and you're a hot mess doesn't mean you're being inauthentic, just means you're not good at it yet. So are you willing to step out of that comfort zone, put yourself out there and learn a new skill? I didn't start learning how to ballroom dance till I was 30. I just started learning Italian a couple of months ago. Is it as good as my Spanish? Nope, won't be for a while. But I'm gonna learn it. I don't feel inauthentic because I'm not good at using it. That's my desire to be able to connect next summer when I'm going to Italy. I want to be able to communicate with that population. That's a new population for me, never been there before. Well, I can make them do it my way in English because, hey, that's how I am. I'm American. Speak to me in English, I'll find the translator or somebody at the hotel. Or I can decide, no, I want to communicate with them their way. I'll be sloppy and messy, but I'm going to make the effort. It's not different from learning to communicate with a different group. I am a recovering academic, former professor, now in the corporate executive coaching space. In the beginning, was there some imposter syndrome 10, 15 years ago? Fear of speaking to CFOs, CTOs, whoever else, feeling like, well, how are they gonna listen to me? I'm a linguist. I was a teacher. How are they gonna connect? You get past it, you decide, I have information that you need, and I'm going to learn to speak your language. I'm gonna come out of my academic language, which academia spent a decade beating into my skull. If you're going to be heard at a conference, if you're going to be allowed to publish, you are not allowed to use any word with less than 4 syllables. Then I got into the real world, and I realized people don't like that. They tune you out. They don't get it. I had to actively unlearn what it took them a decade to drill in. I didn't like that. It wasn't comfortable. I had to learn even how to phrase what I do in ways that people would understand it. That was the learning curve. It wasn't me being inauthentic. It was just saying, I got a new population. I want them to hear what I want them to hear my message, hear the value that I'm conveying without getting them distracted by unnecessary details. So I had to learn that. But it was being authentic. And I had high motivation. Fortunately, I'm here today because I was willing to make that change. So going back to Rohan's talk earlier this morning, anybody who doesn't want to do that or isn't willing to, they're making excuses. It has nothing to do with, well, I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm 70 years old, I can't change. Oh, you don't want to, and that's valid, but then step aside. It's not that you can't change. Everybody can. And if you want proof of it, watch your video. Make a video of yourself talking. You will see in 30 seconds or less exactly what everybody else is seeing or hearing that's not working for me, and you go, oh, okay, well, perhaps. I will not coach any client until we've used the video first and foremost, because I cannot coach you until you see and hear what everybody else sees and hears. Otherwise, we're comparing apples and oranges. When you see and hear that, then come and talk to me. We go from there. Does that answer your question?
It does, but it almost seems like it would take an expert coach in order to really effectively make that transition, or could you do it on your own by reading the book and maybe doing some online stuff?
I would never have written the book if I didn't think you could do it by yourself. It tells you every chapter, there's exercises in it about how to do it. And when in doubt, call me. We'll talk after the session. But yes, it is absolutely changeable. And it's about growth, right? It's not changing from X to Y, it's adding Y to X. It's additional, not substituting. Substituting is where you start to feel like that's like uncomfortable forms of code switching and oppressive things, and that's a whole different topic. That's unhealthy shifting. This is adding. It's just adding to your range of people that you want to be able to connect with. It may not feel natural in the beginning, but eventually it does. And when people start to respond to you better, you go, oh, maybe it's not so bad after all. So let's talk afterward. And with that, I am at the end of my time, so thank you everybody else, and I look forward to speaking with you later today.